Well, hello and welcome to Waterford United. I'm really pleased to be here today because this is all about Waterford, and I have two people with me that are truly all about Waterford. This is Pete Davis and Glenn Patterson, and we're going to talk a little bit today about why they're running for office, and in the end, that becomes what this is all about for all of us who call Waterford our home. Pete, I want to start with you. I want to start with a little bit about not only your history and obviously why you're running for office, but for me, my connection with Pete Davis goes back to his dad. His dad, Herb Davis, was first selectman when I was working for the town of Waterford as a young man, and not that I'm not young now, but that's a long time ago. And so I've known this family for many decades, and I know myself why Pete Davis is running for office. But Pete, maybe you could give us a little background and a little bit of your reasoning for taking on the challenge of running for Waterford's first selectman.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. First of all, I want to thank you for agreeing to host the show. That was obviously an important thing to me. And I also want to thank MetroCast for giving the opportunity to have this venue to reach out to the community and talk about community issues, and also why Glenn and I are running. Briefly, if I can, you touched on it a little bit. My family actually has a long history of community service in Waterford.
That's for sure.
Actually, going back to my grandfather, Arthur H. Davis, to the early 1900s, actually. My dad served 2 terms on the Board of Selectmen. Also, he was on RTM, the Board of Finance, and his life was the town of Waterford. He defined community service for me growing up. So having said that...
Pete, I witnessed that too as a young person. I saw that your dad was a model to me as a young man just starting in town government.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, Paul. I started in my early 20s. You didn't have a choice in our house. You grew up with Waterford politics or community service, whether you wanted it or not. So having said that, I started in my early 20s and served on the RTM, the Board of Finance. I actually served on the Conservation Commission for a number of years. I was chair for 5 years. And then as everybody's life changes, obviously I had career changes. We sold our insurance agency and I went to work in Norwich almost 26 years ago now.
Wow.
And so not that I walked away from public service in Waterford, because I was still involved in community service organizations, but I almost feel like I'm coming home now.
Yes. Well, you even served on the Board of Selectmen when I was first selectman.
Correct.
So you were definitely involved with Waterford town government.
Yeah.
Yes.
So again, as I built my career in Norwich, obligations, of course, families with kids in college, you have to pay attention to your job and your career at that point, and Glenn's gone through the same thing, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
So I just have community service in my bones, and not just Waterford, but during my time in Norwich, I also spent a lot of time doing community service in Norwich, and that was also important because it wasn't just a career there. Norwich is kind of my adopted home, but it's time for me to come home again and actually begin to get involved in the community again.
Pete, you highlighted some of the things, but I can remember so many reasons why you say your community service is in your bones. I remember when you served voluntarily for a long time as treasurer for the Waterford Preteen Basketball League, and even when your children were beyond the playing age, you were still helping out to make sure that opportunity was there every year for hundreds and hundreds of boys and girls. I remember you volunteering when I worked in recreation for midnight basketball down at Clark Lane.
That was always fun.
That was a tough chore, and all the parents who are watching, the grandparents will know full well that's a hard age, and we saw some unusual behavior, but it was also a good thing to have available as an outlet and as a focal point of adults and young people intermingling. So Pete, I know public service in every way, both administratively and in your heart, is in your bones, that's for sure. Glenn, I've known you for a long time too. You were one of my bosses when I worked at Waterford Recreation, because you were on the RTM many years ago.
That's true.
And for anyone who served administratively in town government, you know that there's a lot of bosses. There's all the taxpayers, there's all the people that use the services, there's everyone on the RTM and the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen. So there's a lot of bosses, but you were one of them. And I've also known you and your dad and your grandfather and all of the commitments that your families had to Waterford, like the Davis family. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Paul, it's a little bit of a kind of a parallel path thing.
Yes.
My background professionally isn't the same as Peter's. Peter's worked in the municipal side. I worked at Electric Boat for 37 years in the planning department, and I've retired, and now I think it's time, very simply, to try to give back to the community that we grew up in. Peter and I have talked, I'll say, at length about what we feel are the opportunities we had growing up in Waterford. Our families found opportunity here. We were able to take advantage of those opportunities, and now I think we both feel pretty strongly that it's time to come back and give back to all those bosses you talked about, and try to help move Waterford forward here. So.
The way, when I hear it from you and I hear it from Pete, I can't help but feel that that's exactly the right reason to run for office in a community, because it is service, and it's hard work. It's a lot of dedication, a lot of sacrifice of family time and personal time, but it's also, the reward is that you're making your home the best place it can be for everybody who's there. And see, the least that we can do, who are witnessing their efforts, is to make sure that we vote, because that we have two people here who are more than willing and certainly able and experienced enough to give us the kind of commitment that we need for good town government. So, as one voter, one taxpayer, and one person who loves Waterford through and through, I've got to say I'm very grateful, deeply grateful to both of you for taking on the effort and running for office. Thank you for that.
I appreciate that.
Paul, you hit on a very important point, and this is one of the discussions that Glenn and I have had repeatedly. Is one of our concerns is that if you look at voter participation in town for a number of years now, unfortunately, voter participation has fallen off. Now, we have our theories as to why that's occurred. I don't think it's a phenomenon that's happening just in Waterford. I think if you look across the country, there are issues of voter apathy and people just feeling that they've been disenfranchised for whatever reason. Topic for another day. But one of the things that Glenn and I want to do, and that's part of the reason we're doing this show, and we'll be doing some other things during the campaign, is we really think that there's been a fairly significant lack of communication on the public end of things recently. And again, there are probably a number of different reasons for that. That's not assigning blame. I think that's just a statement of fact if you look at the record. So again, part of the reason we're doing this show and part of the reason we're running is we hope to give the voters of Waterford another choice. And perhaps, if nothing else, through this show and through our website that we'll have up in a week or so, we need to generate a little bit more conversation within the community about some of these issues. And it all doesn't have to be negative. That campaigns unfortunately tend to go that way sometimes. But if you're going to hold yourself out as a leader, you need to realize that sometimes you have to have uncomfortable conversations. That's just part of the job description. So again, as we go forward through the campaign, we're hoping that people become a little more involved and become interested in some of the things that are going on in town.
Oh, Pete, I'm so glad you said that, because that's a deep concern of mine too. When we put our efforts together, and I ran for office back in 1999, we had a good turnout. We had a good turnout, frankly, each time I ran for office. But the best of the turnouts are when there's reasons to discuss the issues before the community.
Very important.
Yep.
And Waterford has a lot of issues before it now, and there's reasons to discuss it. And it's not a matter of, as you said, of assigning blame. It's just a reality that we, the voters, have a deep interest in what happens in that town hall and how that carries out into our lives. Maybe more interest in what comes out of there than does out of Hartford or even Washington, D.C.
Sure.
Because it affects us on a daily basis a lot more, personally. Every level of service, education, fire service, police service, public works, then all the permitting and planning offices, they all have a function that we encounter almost every day of our lives in the town of Waterford. So, as I said already, I couldn't be more grateful to have two people who I know are more than able and qualified to help us get through the issues that are before us. You know, there's so many that I'd like to discuss, but one that, you know, I guess I'm getting old because I go walking through Quaker Hill every day now, you know, because not that I don't have anything to do, but I've got to get some exercise because you can't sit at a desk all the time. It's not good to you. So one of the things I do when I go walking through Quaker Hill is hear a lot of voices from a lot of people of all ages. I see the school children when they're waiting for the bus and kind of kibitz with them. And then some of the younger people who are either jogging or walking as well. And then I see a lot of the seniors who I've known, you know, since I was a child in Quaker Hill. One of the issues in recent months that I've heard a lot about is the firefighter assignment issue. And
Sure.
It's been an issue that has struck me because, you know, it didn't have a direct personal effect on me, but it had an emotional effect on me because when my dad was failing, I needed the Quaker Hill ambulance, and he needed the Quaker Hill ambulance a lot of times. And the same Quaker Hill firefighter and the same volunteers came to our house each time. And they knew what my dad was going through and what I was going through, and they knew us personally. Mm-hmm. Now, did that have anything to do on my dad surviving longer? I doubt it. I doubt it had any medical effect. But it had a big psychological effect on two men who were struggling with one of life's most difficult times. And boy, if ever I was grateful for a town service, it was that Quaker Hill ambulance when it came all the times that we needed it. And in that case, it was 5 times in a fairly short period of life. So with that, I've heard a lot about that concern. Not about the professionalism of volunteers or the assignment of part-time people or any of that. The concern is about that fairness of the right connection to your local fire company who are going to be there in your most extreme needs. And that is a deep concern among a lot of people in Quaker Hill that I've talked to. So I'd like to talk about that issue a little bit, how that assignment change came about, what it means, and maybe what could be done to do that better.
Sure, Paul. It has been an emotional issue, and there's good reason for that. Firefighters take their job very seriously. They're very passionate about it. I don't care if you're a paid guy or a volunteer individual. You're doing that, and those people are very passionate about it. It's of necessity because I think in that environment, you have to be passionate about what you're doing, just the nature of it. Having said that, just a little bit of background on my family's involvement with the fire service, because I think it's important when people are listening to this commentary that they understand this isn't just a candidate talking.
Oh, yes, I follow you.
This is an individual that has some knowledge of the fire service. In fact, quickly, my grandfather, Arthur H. Davis, was one of the original incorporators of Fire Company Number 1, Jordan Fire Company Number 1, 1923. Yeah. Following that, I had a number of uncles involved. My dad was involved for years. He held a number of officer positions in Jordan. I had a couple of brothers that were bunk guys there. I have 2 brothers. My brother John was a professional firefighter with EB for years.
Yes.
My brother Dan is still a professional firefighter with the City of New London. So there is a long history, and even though I didn't have any personal involvement, except for when I was young, I had the opportunity to go up and climb all over the fire trucks whenever I wanted because we grew up in Jordan Village. But again, it's just that issue, and you've all experienced this, and a lot of the viewers have probably experienced it. In that family environment or in that environment of friends and families, you're talking about issues and things that impact your life. Again, you just absorb that information.
Oh, yeah. A lot of families that affects eventually almost every family.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the volunteer fire system, again, we're talking about 1923 and even earlier before they formally organized the fire companies. The volunteer fire system is ingrained in this community, and this should be a conversation. It should have been a process that involve the community. And that's where I find fault with this. And I want to make it clear. There's
By the way, that reflects something I've heard, Pete, what you're saying, because people, maybe it was discussed, I know, discussed for a long time within the corridors of Waterford Town Hall and the fire service office and the fire houses maybe even, but it was not in the community. People were surprised by this assignment change.
It wasn't. And honestly, Glenn and I were surprised. I had heard some background noise about it. But it was just that. It was background noise. And to be fair about it, usually I try to ignore the background noise and try to get the information before I codify my thoughts and make a decision.
Yes.
But you've hit the nail on the head. Glenn and I were sitting at the Board of Finance meeting a few weeks ago as the fire administrator was explaining the process that they had gone through. And I want to make a couple important points here. First, to your point, Paul, it was about a 2-year process, as we understand it. 14 meetings.
A union negotiation process?
Yes, it was driven essentially by the union negotiations, but that's another point too.
Right.
I've had family members that have been union firefighters.
Yes.
I absolutely understand the discussion about safety for those guys responding to emergency situations.
I think most of the voters appreciate that.
And I'm sure part of the reason my brother Dan left Waterford, he was a paid guy at Cohansey, and went to New London, was because of coverage issues during the week, which is part of this discussion.
Exactly.
So having said that, listening to the fire administrator present his rationale or the process, what became very evident was that they were changing the operational structure of 2 firehouses significantly.
That was Goshen and Quaker Hill?
Goshen and Quaker Hill.
Yep.
Within that conversation, the missing piece was the volunteer system. I heard the first selectman say in that meeting that what people needed to understand was that we have a volunteer system that's backed up by the paid department.
Right.
So, having said that, why would you leave the volunteers out of that process and out of that conversation when you know that you're changing a primarily volunteer system? You're changing it operationally by reassigning paid staff.
Right,
and, and I'm going to let Glenn explain the details of it as he understands it.
Right.
Why would you not, over 2 years and 14 meetings, not have those people at the table? It's puzzling. It's confusing, and again, that's one of the main issues I have with the process. And the other issue is, and Glenn and I have talked about it at length, it's an issue of equity.
Well, that's what I've heard, Pete, from the non-firefighter community. That's how they see it, and they also see that absence of the volunteers in the primary discussions that led to this assignment change. I think the people see what you've just described, and it puzzles them.
Well,
Right.
this is a serious topic, but essentially, in my mind, what they've done is they've put a saddle on a chicken, and they're trying to convince the community it's a horse.
Yeah.
No, it's not a horse. And I'm going to let Glenn explain the process in a little more detail, because I think it's important.
It's one of those times that when I've heard the people in Quaker Hill talk to me about this, I know that they're not just complaining to complain, and they're not even talking about taxes. They're talking about why and how is this fair. So.
Sure. Yeah, I think Pete's perspective, again, from the perspective of being from a firefighting family, and the fact that there were stakeholders, and I'll use that word because there were stakeholders in this discussion that didn't have a chance to hold their stake, I guess. I don't, maybe not the correct way to put that, but, and Pete mentioned, of course, the fire chiefs, the responsible people at those 2 firehouses didn't have opportunity, I don't think, to adequately or weigh in or at all weigh in on that staffing change driven by those negotiations. And of course, the other stakeholders are the residents, as you say. When I looked at that process, and when I listened at the same meeting to how the administration described how they went through the process of making this decision, I heard, and I'll say this, I heard some good things, and I heard some not so good things. And just to be fair, from the good things that they said, they were attempting to come up with a staffing plan using a process that was data-driven and driven by safety. And in this case, they were talking about the safety of the firefighters themselves. And again, Peter already addressed that. The intentions were good. Again, the lack of communication, though, to those other stakeholders who are the people who receive the service, was visibly absent and disturbing. When you get to the point, when I dug in a little deeper and understood exactly what the staffing plan was going to mean, two things became apparent. Oh, and I guess let me back up one step. This was presented at that meeting at the Board of Finance as we're improving fire service in the town of Waterford. I think what's clear is that for two sections of the town of Waterford, for two fire districts, there wasn't improved service. There was, in fact, a loss of service. Regardless of how the administration says they can cover those firehouses at all times, they say they think they can do it, and I believe that I believe that they'll do their utmost to do that.
Sure.
But the bottom line is that staffing plan, as it was put forward, puts the risk out there of there being no coverage at those firehouses at certain times during the day, during the week. And the other fact is that there was a loss of coverage. 520 hours in Goshen, 468 hours at Quaker Hill.
Because they changed the hours of assignment, right?
Correct.
They did.
They changed the shift length.
Yeah, people
so
know this.
10 to 8
and
hours.
that, to me, is the core issue of the inequity.
Yes.
And you heard it at the meetings, the resident meetings, the sense of unfairness, the sense that disrespected was a word that was used, and just inequity, unfairness.
Coming from Quaker Hill, it really comes across, and I'm sure it does in Goshen too, because like it or not, those two important, integral parts of our community are a fairly long way from town hall,
Sure.
Geographically. And it feels like, and sounds like, and seems like almost, we're a colony of the main core of the community. That's not a good way to deal with equity. Yeah. And I'm sure the intentions are good, but the results have left a sense of gap, right. and as you said, retreat from commitment to service that concerns people very deeply.
What's disconcerting to me also is that this process went on for a couple of years, so there were obviously opportunities to engage the chiefs at Goshen and Quaker Hill and/or the community.
Yep.
The question was asked at the Board of Finance meeting of the fire administrator because they're saying they're monitoring this, which is the proper thing to do. If we find that it's not working out, what do we do? The response of the fire administrator was, well, we'll have to go back to the unions and talk about it. So after listening to the community for about half an hour, 45 minutes,
sure.
We weren't involved, we weren't informed, we should have been involved, we should have been informed. After hearing that, the fire administrator still said, if there's an issue, we'll go back to the union. No, I'm sorry. The correct response is, if we find this is not working, yes, we have to return to the bargaining table with the union. That's a given. Mm-hmm. We have to honor our contracts, but we're locked into this now. The missing part of that conversation again was, no, we go back to the unions and the community and try to figure this out so it's equitable and it's transparent and the community's involved. That's what bothered me as much as anything else. Sure. Is after that 45-minute conversation, there still seems to be, that they're not hearing the community, and that's bothersome.
It surely is. Now, I know, because I sat in the first selectman's office, and I know the commitment you have to the taxpayers to try to restrain costs, but the people are not of a frame of mind, certainly with the people I've listened to in Quaker Hill, not of a frame of mind to be retreating from a commitment to service.
A public safety.
Yeah,
It's a public safety issue, plain and simple.
And everyone who sits in that office better remember that, for instance, a lot of people you're serving in Quaker Hill, they may not even be using the education department.
Sure.
We have a lot of retired people in
Yep.
Quaker Hill, older people, and they know full well they have a commitment and a responsibility to help pay for children's education. But they expect the community in turn to look after
That's
them.
excellent. That's an excellent point.
When they need, an ambulance call or an emergency call to their home.
Right.
The other thing you touched on, Paul, and it's important to understand this, is there's no budget savings. This is actually costing the town
Yeah.
more to
More,
do.
actually.
Yeah.
So
So
bottom
it
line
really
is,
gets down to a service question.
Sure,
It does.
right?
It's a service.
It's an added cost, again, in the interest of public safety, but we think they swung and missed on that one.
You know, you're coming around, listening to you two and learning, more of the facts of this issue. It strikes me all the more reason where we started today's conversation. You two understand this community. You two, your families have been an integral part of this community for so many decades that you know full well what I'm saying. Some of this stuff you can't get out of data analysis or a textbook or a college course. You have to understand the people you're serving. And I feel so confident and comfortable to be sitting with two people who I know understand the people of this community and what they need and what motivates their interest.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Paul. If you're taking a leadership position, you need to understand, and this is just a fundamental, basic understanding of what leadership requires. You're representing the community. Now, if you're losing sight of the fact that you represent the community and your decisions are going to be driven purely by data and statistics and graphs, there's a problem there. There's a disconnect. At any level of government, especially in Waterford, because we have a strong sense of community here, we have a strong history of involving the public in critical decisions in Waterford. I agree with you completely. We unfortunately missed the boat on this one. But there is a positive aspect to this. It may not seem like there is, but there is. The positive aspect is, as Glenn has alluded to, there is an increased level of safety for the paid guys responding to some of these emergencies.
Yes, that's important.
And we have to be cognizant of that, and we have to do what we can, not only to protect the paid guys, but also the volunteers and also the people that live in those two communities.
That's right.
So it's not just about the paid personnel. It's about the volunteers. It's about the people that live in those two fire districts.
All segments of that chain, yep.
So that's one positive. The other positive spin, quite honestly, is lesson learned. This has been a case study in what can happen and what can go wrong when you don't involve the community in decisions that they need to be involved in. So going forward, whether it's Glenn and I after November or the current administration that's sitting there now, going forward, this has been, to me, a lesson to the community that you have to stay engaged, you have to pay attention to what's going on in government.
I think that's a perfect way for us to wrap up, because sitting today with Pete Davis running for Waterford First Selectman and Glenn Patterson running for the Waterford Board of Selectmen, Waterford United is the right way to go forward, and you guys bring that message loud and clear. Thanks for that discussion, and all of us have a responsibility to vote on November 3rd and make sure that Waterford goes forward in the united way and the right way for the town of Waterford and for all of us in it. Thank you for watching.